Hello and welcome to Vancouver. My name is Sarah Ross and I'm with TransLink, and we are so pleased that you are all here for this 25th edition of Rail Volution being held in Canada for the very first time. I hope you all had a wonderful time at the opening reception last night at the spectacular setting of the Polygon Gallery in the city of North Vancouver, where we got to overlook this spectacular setting and beautiful land. And I want to begin by acknowledging that this beautiful land that we are gathered on today is the unceded and traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples. This area of the region is the traditional territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. Region-wide, TransLink service area falls within the traditional territories of 46 First Nation communities. For those of you not from British Columbia, land acknowledgements are done at the opening of a wide variety of events and meetings and have been adopted as common practice. Land acknowledgements are a tradition that date back centuries for Indigenous people. And today, a land acknowledgement is an opportunity to show recognition of and respect for Indigenous peoples and their protocols. It is one small but important step towards reconciliation. We say traditional to recognize how land was traditionally used or occupied by Indigenous people, and unceded to recognize the land was never surrendered, relinquished, or handed over by a treaty or other government. When you live in a coastal temperate rainforest, you have to be prepared for rain, no matter how hard you've crossed your fingers that it won't rain when you've invited 1,300 of your best friends to town. And if you aren't prepared yet, please stop by the TransLink store in the public square and pick up your own TransLink umbrella, complete with a transit map on the inside. Show off Joining us next is Bowinn, member of the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia and the representative of North Vancouver-Lonsdale. You were in her riding yesterday at our party last night. MLA Ma's work in the provincial government focuses on housing and transportation and childcare. She is also the Parliamentary Secretary for TransLink and a champion for transit and sustainable and livable communities. She is an engineer, and prior to being elected in 2017, she managed terminal expansion and redevelopment projects at the Vancouver International Airport. Please welcome MLA Bowinn Ma.
Hocht squal to noyap, hochten squalwin quins quachnomiap, neilta to meok, ya musquium, escohomish, a Tsleil-Waututh. So what I've just said to you in the language of the Squamish Nation peoples here is good morning. It's wonderful to be with all of you here today, and we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. As you heard earlier, my name is Bowinn Ma, Parliamentary Secretary for TransLink, and I'm here on behalf of Premier John Horgan, Minister Selina Robinson, and the Government of British Columbia to welcome you all to our beautiful province and the home of TransLink, North America's best public transportation system of 2019. As one of the only jurisdictions in North America with a public transit ridership that continues to grow, urbanists and public transit enthusiasts all over have been asking how Metro Vancouver does it. How is it that the city of Vancouver is able to boast that more than 50% of all of its trips taken within its city are done by non-car modes? How is it that TransLink continues to see increases in ridership year over year, with a record-breaking 7.1% increase in system-wide boardings over the last year alone? There are many different reasons worthy of mention, but in the time I have today with you, I want to touch on one particular, reason, and that's politics. You see, what drove me into politics from engineering was in part the realization that most of our challenges as a society are not technical, they are political. And when I say politics, I don't just mean politicians, elections, political parties, or Donald Trump. I'm talking about all of us, the public. How we as humans interact with one another and the environment around us, and how we behave given what we believe we know about each other and the world influences how we do or do not vote, electing representatives and producing governments that then manifest society's value judgments of good or bad, of right or wrong, into laws, regulatory frameworks, investments, and cuts, creating the context within which companies operate and within which people prosper or struggle, succeed or fail, live, suffer, or die. And to that end, all things are political, and politics matters whether you want it to or not. Increasing access to public transit is critical to improving social equity in our communities, and our new provincial government is anchored in the values of social justice. This has allowed us to work in partnership with governments of all levels to produce the single largest capital investment into public transit in British Columbia's history. $7.3 billion in an area that services just 2.5 million people. I have to admit, though, those are Canadian dollars. Vancouver City Council members endured blowback for years to forge ahead on building safe cycling infrastructure and transit-oriented communities, resulting in a 7% mode share for cycling, 17% for transit, and 29% for walking, more than 50% of all trips overall. And when you have a Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing responsible for TransLink, like Selena Robinson, who herself cycles, walks, takes public transit to work, and she's talking about how public transit systems are a critical tool in our work towards greater housing affordability and advocating for the building of complete communities around transit hubs, then you get the kind of public policy that serves the broader community, not just people at the top. You get forward-thinking public policy that works for everyone now and into the future. Representation matters. Leadership and public will matter. Elections matter. And as the transportation landscape continues to change, as technologies and new business models emerge, politicians, elected officials, community leaders, planners, and engineers will all have to continue to face the ongoing question of what the future of our communities should look like. For instance, at long last, BC's regulatory regime for transportation network services will come into effect on September 16th to allow peer-to-peer ride-hailing services like Lyft and Tapcar to enter the market. Might be very exciting for a lot of you who are used to that. But how then will BC manage issues like dependence on cars and ensure that public transit ridership growth remains high? Can we buck the trend set by so many other jurisdictions that have seen ridership stall or even drop with the introduction of these on-demand services? How do we address the growing array of personal mobility devices on our streets and roads? If mobility scooters can be on the sidewalk, can electric segways or e-bikes or scooters, e-scooters, should they share the road with cars, with bikes, or do they need their own infrastructure? Why or why not? What happens when automated vehicles become a reality on our streets? Will we maintain our current model of personal vehicle ownership, or can we transition into a shared service model? Automated vehicles can help us substantially increase the capacity of our existing roadways, but will we end up filling every square inch with empty, personally owned, automated vehicles trolling the streets to avoid Vancouver's parking fees? Given that the market is, and will continue to produce innovative new transportation solutions at an increasingly rapid pace. How these technologies interact with the public, whether they turn our streets into permanent gridlock or help facilitate greater mobility for all, what that future looks like for Vancouver, for BC, for anywhere in the world, is guaranteed to boil down to public policy. It will come down to public will and our collective readiness to forego illusions of immediate personal convenience for the greater good, and to our ability to elect and support leaders who are willing to make the difficult decisions that lead us to that greater good. We can invest in shared assets that improve the lives of everyone around us, including those with the least among us. And public transportation options will likely continue to be the way forward into the foreseeable future. For now, in Metro Vancouver, public transportation systems means buses, rail, rapid transit lines, passenger ferries, and boats. But soon, it will include shared active transportation equipment like bikes and e-bikes. In the future, 10, 15, 25, 50 years down the road, who knows? But wherever this road leads us, may we all travel there together. Happy 25 years, Rail Volution. Welcome to Vancouver.
Thank you so much. As Bowinn said, we have a great story to tell in this region. She mentioned the population. You might have caught it, 2.5 million in this region. That puts us at about 24th in terms of Canadian and US cities in terms of rank and population. But we rank 7th in transit ridership, punching way, way above our weight. And you'll see it out there when you're on the system and when you're looking at the transit-oriented communities. Let me just pause for a moment and have a sip of water from my C-Bus water bottle. Joining us now is Jonathan Coté. He is the mayor of New Westminster, one of the oldest and most transit-oriented cities in the Metro Vancouver region. Mayor Coté is also chair of the Mayor's Council on Regional Transportation, which is part of TransLink's governance structure and responsible for funding and policy direction. This is made up of all the mayors of the cities in the region, which is 23, so he gets to put his chairing skills to work quite frequently. Mayor Coté is a daily transit user. I frequently run into him on the train as he's on his way to meetings at our offices, and he literally walks the talk of sustainable transportation. Because he walks to work every day, one of the first things he did when he became mayor was to transform his dedicated parking spot to a spot where the staff and citizens in the city of New Westminster can take a break and have lunch. Now, Mayor Coté, please join me on the stage, but I just have one kind of question. I hope you don't find it a bit too personal, but I'm wondering, are you wearing your TransLink socks?
I am, yes. Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for the introduction. And if this work in being an elected official doesn't work out, I've got the sock model and hand model thing all worked out. So it's an absolute pleasure for me to be here this morning to welcome you to Rail Volution. We're so honored that you've decided to join us here in Metro Vancouver. We're not quite sure why it took 25 years, but we're still really excited that you're up here. Now, as Sarah mentioned, I'm the mayor of the city of New Westminster and the chair of the Mayor's Council, and I suspect most people in the room aren't too familiar with both the city and what the Mayor's Council is. But the Metro Vancouver region, as was mentioned, is a region of 2.5 million people and has 21 cities, 1 First Nations, group, and one electoral A. And those cities and organizations come together to really represent and govern our transportation system through TransLink and through the Mayor's Council. I serve as the mayor of the city of New Westminster, which is the oldest city in the Metro Vancouver region, but it's not one of the largest. To put it into perspective, the population of the city of New Westminster is 70,000. But being the oldest city in the region, it is also a city that was designed well before the automobile, which has had a big impact in shaping our community, and is one of the main reasons that New Westminster actually has the highest mode share of public transit use in the region, because it was designed before the automobile. Now, I've had the pleasure to attend a Rail Volution conference about, I believe, 3 or 4 years ago in the city of Dallas, and really enjoyed the opportunity to attend that conference, attend lots of really important sessions, and really get to see some of the successes in another community. And I think really that's the value of what Rail Volution really does offer. It gives us an opportunity, who are all passionate about advancing sustainable transportation in our communities, to learn from each other, to learn the latest, and to really identify the challenges that we face. And I really did enjoy the opportunity I had, and I'm really pleased to be sitting here today to welcome you all to Metro Vancouver, so that you can see some of our successes, some of our challenges, and what we've been able to accomplish over the years. Now, as the current chair of the Mayor's Council right now, I'd love to take all of the credit for the successes that we're currently experiencing here in Metro Vancouver. But the reality is the successes we have in sustainable transportation in Metro Vancouver and public transit have really been decades in the making. There are a number of things that set our region apart quite significantly and make us very unique across a North American and even worldwide setting. I think probably the first and foremost and probably most dramatic decision our region made was actually not to permit highways into our major city centers. This decision was made many decades ago, but to this day it continues to shape how this region has developed. It continues to shape how transportation works in our region. But it was a very real debate, and there were lots of plans to build a highway right down to almost where we are right now. If you have a chance to go near some of our stadiums in Science World, you'll actually see the remnants of the viaducts, which were essentially phase 1 of the highway that was supposed to go right through downtown Vancouver. From my perspective, I think this is one of the best decisions this region has ever made, and certainly shaped us moving forward. The next important decision from our history that I think has been so important in shaping the successes here in Metro Vancouver is our protection, our urban containment boundary, and our willingness to protect the agricultural land and green spaces. In the 1970s, the provincial government created an agricultural land reserve across the province, but a large number of that land happened right here in the major urban area of Metro Vancouver. And this region has always dedicated itself to protecting that agricultural land and some of our natural spaces. And certainly by creating that urban containment boundary, not to mention having a city that's bounded by mountains and ocean and a U.S. border, we really do have had to look at how do we grow a lot differently than other places that don't have those types of restraints. And that has had a significant impact on how we have evolved over the decades. And the third and final thing is we've also planned differently. For many decades, Metro Vancouver has committed itself to a livable region strategy. And yes, we've had our debates and our fights over the decades and over the years, but the core principles of these planning issues have been stuck to and committed to for years. One of the major components of our regional growth strategy is actually the regional town center model. So we're all here in downtown Vancouver, which is the major town center in the Metro Vancouver region, both for employment and residential density. But we've got regional town centers all across the region. Just last night, you were in the regional town center in the city of North Vancouver. And that plan of having different nodes of mixed-use, higher-density areas throughout the region that has allowed us to do a lot more with our transportation system instead of designing one in which everyone has to come to and from our downtown core here in Vancouver. So fast forward today, and I think we are really starting to see some incredible numbers come in that have been already mentioned. Over the past 3 years, we've seen an 18% growth in public transit ridership. This has led Canada and the United States during that period. Absolutely phenomenal growth. And this success, I think, has come for a couple reasons. Number one, for all the historical reasons that I mentioned to begin with. I think those have given us the foundation and the ability to be able to work to see the successes that we're seeing right now. But the next big one is over the last 3 years, we've invested big time in improving and investing in our public transit system. As Parliamentary Secretary Ma mentioned, we are currently investing over $7 billion into our transit system. And this reaches every part of our transit system, whether that's our bus network. There is increased bus service in every one of our 21 municipalities across the region, to the C-Bus that many of you rode last night is now getting a brand new C-Bus and moving up in frequency there, to expansion of our rapid transit and SkyTrain network. There is a consistent effort to improve transit all across the region, and it is resulting in increased transit ridership. One of the most stunning figures is actually been south of the Fraser in the city of Surrey, the second largest city in Metro Vancouver, which is a more suburban community, has actually been leading the region in 1 year, saw an 18% growth in transit ridership, which really shows that if we're able to invest in good, reliable transit, even into the suburban communities, we can really start to shape the transportation patterns. So although I'm incredibly proud of where we are right now and what we've accomplished, we, like other regions, face our challenges. One of the biggest challenges that we face here in Metro Vancouver has to do with housing affordability. Metro Vancouver, for a variety of reasons, has faced a tremendous amount of pressure on housing and the cost of housing. And how that relates to transit is we've been so successful in creating beautiful transit-oriented developments that the areas with the most well-served from transit, the real estate prices have gone up quite significantly, meaning that our low and moderate income earners in our region are actually being priced out of the transportation options that we are so desperately trying to provide them. And this has been a significant challenge that we want to continue working on. The next big challenge has to do with we are a region that is growing and growing very rapidly. And as a growing region, that puts pressures. We are seeing congestion not only on our transit system, but on our road network. And as a region, we are going to have to continue to grapple with that. So moving forward, TransLink is currently engaging at our long-range Transport 2050 plan, and hopefully through this conference you'll be able to connect yourself with some of the work we're doing. But we want to be able to look at those challenges, look into the future, and look to say, how is autonomous vehicles going to work? How are we going to be a region as we start to welcome some of our Uber and Lyfts into our communities, make sure that does not undermine our transit system. So we welcome each and every one of you here to Metro Vancouver. We hope this is a wonderful opportunity to learn from our successes and our challenges. And we too hope to be able to learn from all of your lived experiences and everything you brought from all the different areas that you come from. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Mayor Coté. One of the differences that I've noticed between Canadians and Americans is that Canadians don't tend to make references to faith or religion in a public or a work context very much at all. But I can't help but think of our next speaker as the patron saint of Rail Volution. I think Congressman Earl Blumenauer doesn't need much introduction for most of you. He was there at the beginning of Rail Volution. He was there before the beginning. Heck, from what they tell me, he was the beginning. And so on this 25th anniversary of Rail Volution, it is an honor to welcome Earl Blumenauer to the stage to talk about his reflections on the past 25 years of the work that he and all of you have done to advance livable communities across the U.S. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah, for that very thoughtful and kind introduction. I won't make the comments I was going to make about your shameless, gratuitous self-promotion with your water bottles and your umbrellas, and you're not listening to me. You missed some of my best lines. I'll stick them in at the back and see if it's more appropriate. And I do appreciate Sarah beginning with the land acknowledgement. As an American politician in Canada, I feel like I need to have my own acknowledgement. I apologize that we designated you as a national security threat and levied tariffs. I apologize for our chief executive who's threatened to use nuclear weapons to stop hurricanes. I don't think he's followed through on his threat to buy British Columbia and the Yukon to annex to Alaska, but I haven't checked my email yet this morning. I apologize on behalf of the American people for what you've had to put up with. But I must say, we want to give credit where credit is due. And I will say, Dan, have you been formally introduced to this group yet, Dan? Dan Bartholomew, stand up. Dan and the Rail Volution staff have built on the foundation of this conference in ways that I think is really extraordinary. And you look at the program, the work trying to help empower people to make these changes in their communities, and it's really rail volutionary. And in keeping with that sense of commitment and being ahead of the curve, I've been asked to announce that there's a new panel, and there'll be details for it as you walk out of the room. It is using urban design and finance with a Sharpie. You would be surprised how the most outrageous plans pencil out with this technique. Not enough federal money, age-old challenges of people being opposed to both sprawl and density. Creatively using a Sharpie means you'll never have to say you're sorry. Details at the back of the room. And we do appreciate the opportunity finally to get north of the border to share the Rail Volution in Vancouver. We have been enriched by a number of your participants over the years. I know I spent a lot of time with Professor Price about dealing with how things happen up here. The wisdom of not having freeways, not having LRTs, not following the trends, creating your own trends. Well, what we started in Portland 25 years ago in an attempt to take our little light rail system and make it into a system has been part of a national trend. The early conferences focused on land use transportation, expanding transit system. It was a different era. We were concerned about declining populations in aging urban areas. And it's interesting how some of those challenges seem almost quaint today when we're looking at the impact of gentrification, the reversed in terms of populations in Detroit and Kansas City, Brooklyn, for God's sake, you can't recognize. Things are happening here. And it's exciting to see how our community and others have been fighting on livability and improving the quality of life. It's a sober reflection in terms of what we're doing in the United States. We're in a different era with the federal government. Even the less sympathetic Republican administrations sort of agreed on basic principles. let alone things like science and weather patterns. It's a different challenge today. At the same time, we did not have the focus that we should have had on discrimination, on affordability. In many cases, we weren't prepared for success in terms of the disruption that would have in terms of gentrification and in terms, boomerang, in terms of transit ridership as people, as the mayor said, get priced out of transit. Climate concerns were on the horizon, but not with the sense of urgency. Now we're looking at things like gun safety being driven by moms and kids who are moving the needle, and they're doing that on climate. The importance of equity and restorative justice has taken hold and proven key in meeting the needs of vibrant communities, and it's not just for political support. Without full participation, you cannot reach our potential. Reference has been made already to the changing landscape in terms of transportation and technology, disruptive forces like Lyft and Uber and Airbnb, e-bike, scooters, all this stuff you're going to be talking about. How we challenge it so it doesn't end up running us over as one of those mad scooter people on the sidewalk. Urbanization has provided cities with success in conventional terms, but that displacement and urbanization in the most successful cities is a challenge that we still haven't appropriately addressed. And we do face the need of maintaining affordability, promoting equity, and engaging in restorative justice to right past rounds. Many of you have led breaking new ground, acknowledging centuries of racial segregation and discrimination, leadership in eliminating exclusionary single-family dwelling. Anybody here from Minneapolis? Stand up and take a bow. We passed some legislation in Oregon. We'll see how that works on a statewide basis. I'm encouraged. California is moving ahead. You've led the charge in passing local ballot initiatives and bond measures, laying the foundation that allow you to pivot, making up for lapses in current federal policy, laying a foundation so when we come to our senses in Washington, D.C., you're prepared and ready to go. There's one experiment that's taking place in Oregon right now that I'm particularly proud of. There's been a grassroots effort, led a local ballot measure, enacted a local tax primarily on large out-of-state corporations to fund a community initiative to build climate-ready green infrastructure. It was developed by the community. It's being focused on low income and people of color. They're managing it. They're putting it together. They put together the funding, and they're busy implementing it. And I think it's a model that is worth looking at. They're going to have $50 million a year focused on areas of greatest need and greatest past neglect. This is the sort of thing we're going to have to take in terms of dealing with the change dynamics and understanding how we can capitalize on it to solve problems. In 16 months, people in the United States will have an opportunity to have a reset. I sincerely believe that we ought to be able to move forward. So, I don't know, pass a gas tax increase the first time in 26 years, pass it in time to start the transition to a new, more sustainable form of transportation finance that's based on road use. Changing tax policy to raise and shift our priorities to those who need it the most, rather than what you saw, $2.3 trillion added to the deficit, the largest transfer of wealth in Americans' history, primarily helping people who didn't need it, and neglecting the things that you would be able to do that would be transformative. We're also looking at how to recapture revenues in, again, forgive me, Canadians, if I call our healthcare system a system, as we spend twice as much as you do for worse outcomes. But there's a headroom there. There's an opportunity to be able to use the money that is in the main being spent suboptimally to target the environmental impacts of health. Let's write a prescription for stable, affordable housing for people who are and have fragile health care. It will pay for itself in reduced health care costs that the rest of us will pay. Housing as basic infrastructure. I just issued a little report I'm kind of proud of, Locked Out, last Thursday, that calls for a reset on federal housing programs. Because although a number of you are making real progress dealing with the affordable housing crisis and homelessness, it doesn't work if the federal government is missing in action. And I have a few little suggestions for them to step up, for them to provide guarantees that cost-burden renters are not going to have to exceed the 30%. Let's give them a direct subsidy. Let's have a loan program for populations that were discriminated against for a century and couldn't even buy property in some neighborhoods where they were qualified. Let's set that program up. Some people say this is expensive. Remember $2.3 trillion and the fact that we haven't raised the gas tax in 26 years. But let's do something radical, like take away the tax deduction for second homes. Or for that matter, let's convert the tax deduction for mortgage interest to a credit for all homeowners. I'm getting carried away, and Sarah's getting nervous. You've got a program and a great city to explore. But let me just say that we need to be thinking about how we harness these forces and to push in non-traditional ways. I have another little publication. It's a distillation of a 152-page bill and a 25-page report into a little comic book that I thought members of Congress could be able to understand about the fight for food. Let's write prescriptions for healthy food. Let's be able to build food networks that are sustainable rather than industrial-based food production that's wasteful and produces food that's too expensive for people to access good, healthy, nutritious food. It doesn't have to be that way. So, I will shut up. I want to say how honored I am to be with you once again, how pleased I am at what Rail Volution has been doing, trying to build the civic infrastructure to take all these crazy ideas, learn from one another, and make them happen. And soon, I predict, that the federal government will be prepared to try and keep up with you. Thank you very much.